Hey everybody, I'm back to talk to you this week about evaluation research and problem analysis, which is chapter 13 in your textbook. And so Dr. Stringer will continue to talk to you all about research. It's important to note that evaluation research isn't really a type of research method. It's really just a type of research, if that makes any sense. So you could use really any of the type of methods that we've talked about to do evaluation research. Um, so kind of like I just said, it refers to a research purpose rather than a specific method. And so typically, I usually describe this to students as, maybe you want to test the evaluation of drug courts. You want to see if they're effective, if they're doing what they're supposed to. Well, you might test whether people that go to drug court are more likely to reoffend or continue to use drugs after they get out of drug courts compared to people that don't go to drug courts. Or maybe is drug use less in counties that have drug courts, like Cobb County, compared to other counties that don't. I don't remember what counties don't have drug courts around here because it's pretty popular. But anyway, so it's a pretty straightforward thing. You look at usually outputs, impacts, things like that, to decide whether a policy is effective. Does arresting tons of people for drunk driving, every year really have any impact on the number of fatalities that we have every year for drunk driving? That might be something you might look at. I don't know. I did a paper on that years ago, so that's why I mentioned it. Anyway, so linking the process to the evaluation, you really want to think about whether these policies are implemented as planned and they're achieving their intended goals is kind of your main, uh, what you really want to do when you're conducting evaluation research, so to speak. Um, so you kind of create this evaluability assessment, so to speak, which is your pre-evaluation, and you determine whether requisite conditions are present. So you have support from the organization, or goals or objectives are, what they're supposed to be doing, what kinds of record or data are available is a good thing because you're going to need some kind of data to be able to evaluate them, and who has a direct or indirect stake in the program. And then you kind of formulate your problem and your measurement. And we've already kind of talked about, uh, measurement, so I won't bore you all with that, and operationalization and stuff like that. So you could decide you want to use a randomized evaluation design, kind of like a randomized experiment, or you look at the case flow. You could look at treatment integrity, conditions requisite. You might look at the staff must accept random assignment and agree to minimize exceptions to randomization. And in your case flow, you got some issues with that. Experimental interventions must be consistently applied to treatment groups and withheld from control groups, which can be a big problem, right? Uh, you don't want to withhold things from some people as they won't like that. You shouldn't withhold drug treatment from some people, but there are natural experiments. Like I said, some people don't get into drug court, some people do. So you're not necessarily deciding who goes and who doesn't. So that's an important thing to think about too. You're not really hurting anybody. And so a lot of this is kind of random assignment or quasi experimental. So there is no random assignment. What is it? Oh, I'm sorry. And it's often nested within the experimental designs as kind of a backup. So, like I said, you just compare those people that had the intervention compared to those that didn't, even though you're not really randomizing it. And then you're using this naturally occurring experiment, so to speak, to conduct or to construct your experimental and your control groups as similar as possible, even though you realize that the reason that some people didn't get into drug court might be that they're repeat offenders and they're not going to stop using drugs. So you have to control for these things in order to be able to weed out these effects. Um, so the S post facto evaluation is kind of after the fact, right? After the experiment has gone into effect, you might look at it and see. Been wanting to do a project lately on whether once areas get Uber if people drink and drive less. Because we probably, many of us have probably waited on New Year's Eve for a taxi that never came at some point in time in our life. But Uber is pretty quick, and you can actually see how long they're going to be. And the taxis will just say, "Yeah, we'll be there when we get there." I don't know. They might have changed their process since Uber's come out. I don't know because I haven't taken a taxi in a while. But anyway, um, oh, one popular method is an interrupted time series design, which is a little bit more advanced than what we've covered in this class. But essentially, you track the trend in things over time. So maybe you want to look at the trend in alcohol-related crashes over time, and then maybe you want to lower the per se BAC level, like they wanted to do to 0.05, and then see if that new policy creates any changes in the number of people drinking and driving or the number of people that are involved in automobile crashes after that changes. And so that might be a way that you might look for kind of these changes in the trend using an interrupted time series design. Um, so when looking at kind of your problem analysis and your scientific realism, you want to search for mechanisms, independent variables, acting in the context to explain the outcomes. And of course, this is pretty straightforward at this point for you all because you've, been in this class all semester. So one thing you might want to look at as well is problem-oriented policing effective? And there's been a bunch of studies that have actually looked at this. And it really depends on how you define it. If you say, does problem-oriented policing reduce crime? Usually these studies, lo and behold, have told us it doesn't. It doesn't have any effect on crime. But if you define problem-oriented policing as being effective, and you look at citizen perceptions of the police, then it isn't effective because it does help with citizen and police interactions as well as perceptions of the police and satisfaction with the police. So how you operationalize and measure these things can really matter. Um, auto theft might be another example. Some other applications of policy analysis or time and space-based analysis, right? So crime mapping is a cool thing that you can do, and maybe you want to look at different areas and maybe hotspots of crime, right? To see whether we can use hotspots policing or some other initiative to be able to help with this crime it might have in an area. So, like for instance, here you can identify drug arrest hotspots in this map here, and then you might look at that and say, well, let's see what we can do, and we're going to implement some sort of a process. Maybe we're going to use community policing, or maybe we're going to try to get some of these people into rehab or something like that. And then you might look at these hotspots later on and see if they're still hotspots or not, to see if you've actually had some sort of effect on them. So one of the interesting things when it comes to applied research and evaluation research is the idea of, politics and the stakeholders. If you evaluate someone's policy or their process and then you find it to be ineffective, they are probably not going to like that. Oftentimes, there's also sometimes there's grant money that people will pay researchers to do evaluation research, and so it kind of creates a little bit of conflict of interest, I think, because the stakeholders want you to find in support of their policy. And so maybe you might not do that. The findings might show that it's ineffective, in which case you still get the money, but they're not going to be very happy with you. These are the things to think about when doing evaluation research. I did some research with drunk driving, and NHTSA's not too happy with me because they wanted to lower the BAC level, like I said, to 0.05. And they actually did it in Utah. Right now, in case you don't know, it's 0.08, which is still lower than it used to be. But 0.05 is like 2 or 3 beers. And I was able to show that if you lowered it to 0.05 instead of arresting people for drinking 2 or 3 beers, it wasn't really going to have any impact on fatalities and stuff in the country, because the people that are drinking 2 or 3 beers are not the problem. It's the people that are drinking 15 beers and driving. Those are the people that are getting in the fatal car accidents and stuff. So I kind of evaluated, that whether that policy would be effective, and kind of help them, even though Utah doesn't really seem to care. But they've got a lot of weird things going on in Utah. I'm sorry if anybody's from Utah. But anyway, uh, so with that, I'll end on applied research and evaluation research, and hopefully you all found that to be pretty straightforward, and you won't have any trouble in the future. And so next module is module 15, and we've got a couple of labs, and your paper, I believe, is due next week. So hopefully you've gotten started on that, and you're not having too much trouble. Um, so at this point, I will bid you all adieu, and I will see you all later. And I hope that you have a good end of the semester.